Shanda, in my personal experience and my personal opinion, Shanda offers this very special blend of offering you the chance to learn about the model in a very detailed and offering you the chance to see all the nuances possible with the model and working with it, while also holding the space in a very kind and loving manner. So it's a very safe space, particularly when working with trauma. I've learned that it's the most effective way of working with it. And well, I have personally worked with Shand as a client, and I've also processed my own share of trauma. And I know how effective and kind she is when working with clients. So she's the perfect person for to lead this part of the session today when it comes to talking about healing trauma and logosynthesis. So this is a warm welcome to you, Shanda. Welcome.
Wow. Thank you, Alan. That is such a warm welcome indeed. The accolades, I'm blushing. Thank you.
So
it's a pleasure to work here with you, and you are indeed a treasured colleague of mine, and it's been a pleasure to work with you in the past, both as a colleague and as a client. Yeah.
Thank you. So what gets us here today is a question that I'm always curious about asking everyone. It's like why you chose logosynthesis. You know, when you're working as a therapist, why logosynthesis? You know, and I understand that before working with logosynthesis, you had been working with other models before logosynthesis, and then
indeed, yes.
And then you experienced logosynthesis, and something happened. There was a switch change. So, would you like to tell us a bit about that story?
I think you might be referring to a story where, so I have a lot of training in other modalities. That's true, and I sort of have this flair or interest in trying cutting edge therapies, and logosynthesis is indeed one of those, that's for sure. When I was working in mental health at a military hospital, I was using a modality that is very effective in the psychotherapy world for trauma resolution, and it is an informed trauma practice. It's called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And my greatest passion is working with military members and veterans who've served in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I had the most interesting pleasure of introducing EMDR to clients after they had already experienced logosynthesis in treating post-traumatic stress disorder. So what was interesting to me is that I asked one day, you know, about continuing on with the EMDR, and to my surprise, they were like, I want to do those phrases. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, can you share with me a little bit as to why that is? And so what I learned and was so fascinating to me, not truly surprising, but really intriguing, was that it was very gentle on their system. And another client said, you know, I just find that other stuff, I just go all over the map of trauma experiences. I never know where I'm going to land, and it's really disconcerting. And I like those phrases, those sentences, because it seems like it's just definitive. I know what's going to happen. I know where it's going to take me, and I don't get as scared, truly. So I just thought that was brilliant to learn that the modality that I have such a keen passion for is one that clients will choose as well. And I think that's important for us to know in the psychotherapy world, where we often wonder what is going on for our clients, what's important for them, what do they need? It's not what we need, it's what do they need.
Right.
Yeah.
And when it comes to what they need, what did you learn about that?
Well, they need an approach that's effective, number one. And I think this is one of the challenges in the field of psychotherapy is finding a treatment modality that truly works, that's tried and true. And so, our clients, like my passion is complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I work with some very complex, challenging cases, not a single incident of trauma, but multiple incidents of trauma, where there's been, explosions and insurgents and repatriations, rocket attacks, the whole shebang. And sometimes that's in addition to trauma that they've had from early on in life, in their childhood perhaps, or early adulthood even. So it's important for them to have something that number one, is effective. And this modality is truly effective. In fact, there's some very surprising results that can happen. I don't want to say it's miraculous and really great things happen, although sometimes they do. But it's a system that is completely comprehensive for you therapists out there, clinicians who are looking for something that is effective. The other thing that's most important for me is the simplicity of it. I mean, I have been a certified trainer since 2013. I started using Logosynthesis in 2008. And so I've done a lot of growth and development, both professionally and personally. And yet I will still reach for the very basic protocol in Logosynthesis in treating complex PTSD, because it works and it's effective and simple for both myself and for my clients. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I could just go on and on and on, but
I know.
Three things are important. It's effective, it's simple, it's very gentle. And I think those three things in combination are so important, both for the clinician and for the client. It's also when the client that shared with me, I don't go all over the map, all over the territory of trauma. It meant that small, manageable, defined aspects of the trauma could be targeted and released. So we don't have to try and do the whole trauma all at once. You can work on it in very small shaved pieces. And I think that's reassuring for clients too, that they don't have to take great big bite-sized pieces. They can, just do it, at their pace. Not what I wish for them, because I would wish they would heal in a snap, but they need to do it at their pace. And so I think that's important as well.
And I think that sometimes what takes clients away from their own process is that sometimes the modalities that we use may invite them to try to puzzle up or put together the whole narrative of the trauma before healing it. And when that happens, there is a risk for re-traumatization reactions. Now, from my personal experience, the way logosynthesis handles, the exploration of a situation does not necessarily take first puzzling up the whole narrative before addressing a specific part of it. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that's a very important aspect. And I love that aspect because it means that not only my clients are in extreme distress, and it also means that I'm not in extreme distress. So there's not this vicarious traumatization that happens for me, even though I'm listening to very detailed, gruesome details of images and sounds and shock waves of explosions, very interesting yet difficult, challenging, hard things that our clients have gone through. But they don't get so activated in the trauma, when you're actually doing the intervention of the sentences of logosynthesis, you know, it releases rather gently and quickly. And so then you can go on to the next piece, because it's kind of like a plate heater in a restaurant. So the plates are all stacked up and they're warm and ready for serving. And you take one plate off and then up pops the next plate or the next aspect of trauma ready to work on. And so you can just do it piece by piece by piece in a very gentle fashion that way. And in terms of compassion fatigue, or what many of us know as burnout or vicarious traumatization, that doesn't happen for me. I mean, at the end of the day, I can see several clients and still have lots of energy left and not feel weighted down or heavy. I just feel like I can go on and do more. And the reason this is because this is an energy modality. And so as we understand in logosynthesis, energy is either frozen, bound up, or stuck in one system, or energy is in flow. And so when energy, and energy either belongs to you or it does not belong to you. And when using the sentences on the aspects of trauma, these gruesome images or sounds are not retained in my mind, my body, my system, because it does not belong to me. So in doing the work, it helps the client to release and neutralize these traumatic frozen images and sounds and perceptions, belief systems. And it also keeps me able to be right there with them, fully present, and not activated by the material that's being expressed. If I can say one more thing, what's really interesting with logosynthesis is that my clients, and I work predominantly with military members and veterans, and you know, they've been involved in some very confidential, top secret stuff. And so they don't always like to share that information with me, even though, you know, our sessions are confidential, and they understand that they still have this position where they hold fast their oath. So sometimes they can do the work without giving any details at all. So it's really interesting that we can work with symbols, colors, shapes, and metaphors. And then, you know, sometimes they want to protect me from all the gruesome, gory details also, and they don't want to share some of the things that they've seen, smelled, heard, etc. So this is another really beautiful way that you can work with logosynthesis with your clients, is with metaphors or shapes, symbols, and not have to really talk about exactly all this, you know, stuff. They know what that coined word means to them. It resonates for them. So they can just work on that frozen energy structure, as we call it in logosynthesis, and release it and neutralize it. And then they're free to not be held back from what really upsets them.
I particularly recall a client who was processing trauma, and in his case, he was not able to recall many details of the situation because of the traumatic experience. But he barely recalled an aspect of it. It was like a lightning bolt, he said. And that's all we had. And there was no more information. And the reactions were there. He was already crying. He was already in distress. He was already very confused. And so we focused on that, on processing the lightning bolt. And after processing that, it immediately opened up a huge range of information right by processing that. And so he was able to move, like you said, at his pace throughout the experience until he reached a point of complete awareness of what had happened, and he was able to process what was left of it. You know, and that is gentle, you know, because people don't have to be perfect, don't have to have all the information. They don't have to be strong to, you know, be able to remember everything before processing anything. They don't have to suffer through it.
No, It's so reassuring that you can create such a secure place for them that they can go at a pace that even they don't understand themselves. So they may not have the language or the full details of the memory of what is holding them back in their life. And I'm thinking of a similar situation to you where I had a client with well, what I had an inkling that she had early childhood sexual assault trauma, and she, I don't think, was aware of it. It was so repressed and locked up that she couldn't even access it. But we were doing some work one day and she was trembling. She was very close to sort of unleashing this, and she didn't know what to call it, what she was seeing, what she was hearing. She didn't know quite what was there, that she could articulate it in words, but she used a symbol that had great meaning to her. It resonated for her. And when she used those words in the sentences, she completely felt at peace thereafter. Her trembling just relaxed. And that's so fascinating to me because that's how I was introduced to logosynthesis. I have an interesting story there because I was in a session with a clinician way back in 2008. And I was going through some difficulties with my spouse at the time. And my legs were trembling. I had this sense that the marriage needed to dissolve. And I had all kinds of beliefs about what could happen, what should happen, shall happen if the marriage were to dissolve. We have two beautiful sons together. And anyway, 3 short sentences and my legs that was just vibrating just stopped. And I looked at my therapist, Julie, and I said, "What is this?" She said, "Oh, it's something new. It's called logosynthesis." Well, that was it. Off to the training track I was, because I took every training there was available to me. And I can't regret that, not for a second.
Yeah,
It's really helped me along my path as a person and also as a professional, to be fully present, not have all that head talk going on in your mind about what could be going on.
mhm.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. I recall I used to see a client that was long before logosynthesis, and we had been seeing each other for like 20 sessions. It was a long journey for her. And she basically came to session because she kept feeling nervous or agitated, anxious. And so I did what I learned before in my previous modalities. We talked about the situation, what was going on, what were her reactions. She started learning what she could do to cope with what was happening. And so she learned about breath work and yoga and meditation, so on and so forth. And then it was a time I recall where there was one time she would come to session and say, "You know what? I'm still anxious. And now I know it's called anxiety. I know that this is happening because of XYZ. This is provoking it. I'm still feeling this way. I'm doing what I'm told, and it's still not working."
Mm.
And that was frustrating for me at the time. And what I realized time after was that sometimes it's not enough to be aware of, the process. Sometimes it's important to be able to just simply process like neutralize the process, neutralize the reactions, because she was still living with those reactions every day, trying to cope with them and still suffering with them. Whereas with
Yes.
logosynthesis, it's a very complete experience. So you don't have to try to control any behavior. You don't have to learn coping skills. You don't have to juggle with life. You just basically apply the procedure and it takes over. You just
Yeah.
observe how it works.
Yes.
That's that. So that was
Yeah, it's
amazing.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, the simplicity of it is really lovely because you don't have to learn so much. In fact, as a clinician, you probably have to unlearn a lot,
Oh yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's not a lot of case conceptualization, pre-planning before a session. there's not a need for interpretations and analysis. We do a lot of this in many other modalities as a clinician. You can still use a lot of skills you've learned. We listen very carefully to the language that's used, and we use very precise language that the client uses, because we don't need to analyze, we don't need to make assumptions or interpret what they're saying. We just need to listen carefully to what is the language they're using. If they say a green hat, we don't then interpret it to be a green cap. A green cap may have a whole different meaning for them, but a green hat is very specific, or we don't say an army helmet, even though we're thinking, okay, it's a green helmet in the army. No, they said a green hat. So you use the very specific, precise language they use. So you don't have to really think too hard about what you're gonna say back to them when you give them the intervention of the sentences.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like we say in the community, we can say lazy, slow, and stupid. Just lay back and see how it works.
Exactly. Yeah, it takes a lot of pressure off the clinician. I don't have to go into my sessions with a whole lot of ideas or planning about what we're going to do. I work with exactly what walks in the room that day, that session. And if they have an issue that's not even related to combat trauma, in my professional experiences, if they're working on another psychosocial stressor, maybe there's something going on with one of their children in their family, and that has them really wrapped around the axle, we say. If that really has them upset, that's what I work on. I work on exactly what is needed for the client. And so I think that's really an interesting way to conceive and perceive how to work with trauma and healing in general. Yeah.
Yeah. One layer at a time.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So we've been talking for a while now, and I'm curious about what are the reactions of the audience? I mean, have you had an experience before, any of you, with logosynthesis? And if so, what has been your experience? I mean, do you see any connections with what we're discussing now? Or do you have any questions that you would like to share? So for this next part of this session, I'd like to invite you to open your mic. And if you have experience, please share your experience with logosynthesis or ask your questions.
I have a comment. This is Pat.
Hi, Pat.
Hi, Pat.
Yeah, I'm anxious to learn more about logosynthesis. One of my friends in Denver introduced me to the concept. I actually trained Shanda with Francine Shapiro's first class on EMDR many decades ago in the last century. And then I used it a lot in my psychologist practice, but I've been using more things like EMDR and metaphors, Ericksonian hypnotherapy techniques for creative blocks. So there's a lot of research today on post-traumatic growth, and that's what I'm focused. I'm not a therapist anymore. I've been a coach for 30 years, but I'm interested in learning about this, and I see so many similarities. So you mentioned EMDR and other modalities. Logosynthesis is uniquely different in what way? Could you say that?
It's uniquely different in that we're using specific sentences. So with EMDR, you're using a bilateral stimulation of either it's sensory, so it's either eye movements that you follow or sound sensory or tapping, but there's not any of that in logosynthesis. You're just repeating pardon me, 3 simple sentences after the clinician in very small sections. And then after the sentence, you just allow some time for it to process, and then you go on to the second sentence. Again, there's a pause, and then the third sentence, and then there's a pause. Now, before the 3 sentences, you do a setup. So it's similar to EMDR. You do a scaling of distress from 0 to 10, And then at the end of the 3 sentences, you do a post evaluation of the distress of 0 to 10.
Shanda and Alan, this is Roxana, and I did do a small training in Canada, Nova Scotia. I can't recall the name of one of the few practitioners at the time there. And I work as a coach. I'm not a therapist, but super curious because I did see the power of it and just scratched the surface. But to kind of build on Dr. Pat's question, I'm curious as to the mechanism that accounts for the results. Like you talked about the frozen energy, like in the body, in the memory of the body, and then it gets released through the 3 sentences, because it does feel a little like magic. You were saying like the therapist has a small role, which is almost humbling to say, hey, I know I have all this training, but I kind of don't need it. It feels kind of formulaic. And this energy is released, as Alan was also sharing. And then your reaction to the trauma shifts. It's not that the trauma didn't happen. You just don't relate to it in the way that maybe you were holding that space prior to the logosynthesis. So could you say a little more about like, what's the secret behind the magic that was discovered?
Well, I don't know if I can share what the secret is behind the magic. You might have to ask that question to Dr. Willem Lammers, but you are absolutely right though. We look at 3 components. So we look at the cognitions that are holding us back. So the thoughts, we look at the body sensations. So what's going on in the body? Where are you feeling the level of distress from 0 to 10? And the other thing is the emotion. What's the emotion? And you're right, we don't erase memories, but what we do with the sentences is we neutralize the intensity of the reaction to it. So we do see that the 0 to 10 comes down the scale lower. We do see that the body reactions, the body sensations are much less intense. And the same with the cognitions that are holding us back in our life, the belief systems that we have, or the thoughts that project us way into the future, or we're stuck in the past and we're not able to be fully present right here, right now, because of what has happened or what we believe might happen in the future. So, yeah, but how does it work? That's the mystery.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
We also now have a
Alan,
question
can you respond to that question?
Oh, no.
You've done a lot of training.
I always take the same approach of the microwave. I don't know how it works. I just use it and it works. That's it for me.
That's a great analogy.
So,
I guess.
Yes, Marge.
Yeah. I came upon logosynthesis a couple of years ago when Dr. Lammers presented at ASAP. And I have done EFT for years and years and years, sort of from the original, just tap and things go away. And I love that that logosynthesis, it uses a lot of the same structure. You identify the physical sensations, you identify the emotion, you identify the thoughts. And then the other piece that I've worked with for years I was working with EFT tapping on anything that came up and anybody that was around me. I'd abduct people in coffee shops that are sitting there saying they're in pain, okay, come here, And the other thing that I was doing was on my own spiritual path, was working with meditation and prayer and intention. You're working with pure intention, ask and you receive. And so I just love, to me, it felt like literally a synthesis of those things. And so I left like a corporate research job a few years ago and have been in the process of retraining, and I'm now doing therapy and using EFT, using and sort of, finding my way with integrating these things. But it feels like it's such a lovely integration of pure working in intention and, the whole somatic work. And the other thing I love is the recognition, the middle sentence, that sometimes the energy is not ours.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't belong to me.
Yeah. Working with that piece. It sort of was the, one of the first things that I saw that officially recognized that, because in our spiritual path, we would work with that. you know, like, is this energy yours? And then using prayer and intention to lift that energy. And so that's what I love. I love those pieces. It sort of pulls together and gives a, you know, a psychotherapeutic basis too for and structure and a wonderful magic. As I was starting with my therapist, who my supervisor when I was doing therapy, I was saying, I do all these flaky things, but are they going to be allowed? Am I going to get like she goes, all those flaky things have real psychological bases, find them, you
Yes.
know. And
Yes.
so that's what I love. It pulls together several of those pieces. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for saying this, because you're right. It is a synthesis of many different types of modalities like NLP and transactional analysis, EFT, EMDR. I mean, there are many things that have culminated to the point of the creation of logosynthesis for Dr. Willem Lammers. So the spiritual component is very important. And we often don't talk about that, but it is essential.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much, Mark.
We also have an intervention from Dr. Joe Shipa. Joe, hi.
Hi from New York. So I also trained, was one of the first trainees with Francine Shapiro, who was brilliant in EMDR, and she it was at the time I was in graduate school at that time, and so she was you know, her EMDR was groundbreaking,
Yes.
and she was widely you know, criticized by some members of the psychological community. I came out of a very traditional PhD program here in New York that was very cognitive behaviorally based. So I was that flaky person who went off to look at the other modalities. I'm of the mindset that it's really important to have tools when you're working with folks. And I also work with complex PTSD a great deal. Logosynthesis, I came across, I'm not even sure how I came across logosynthesis. It might have been in the spring energy event, the Northeast Spring Energy event, that somebody had done a brief presentation on logosynthesis out here. And I then pursued that level 1 training with it. What I can offer about this is being trained in EFT and EMDR and DBT and CBT and every acronym that you could ever imagine. What I can offer about this is that for some of my patients, EMDR, even though it's a really wonderful modality, it is sometimes a little, believe it or not, jarring for them, depending upon the trauma that they're dealing with. The eye movements are a bit intrusive to them, or if I'm using, you know, alternate tapping, I always give them control over that experience, especially for people with PTSD, because they need to feel that. But and EFT, which I love as well, it's a really amazing kind of technique. But for some of my folks, it is also intrusive to be tapping on themselves, especially those who have experienced some type of physical abuse.
Physical trauma.
Yeah. So what has been great is with logosynthesis, when I switch over to it, and we were saying, you know, what causes this to work? I've probably already had those conversations with these folks about the issue of frozen energy within the system and to get the energy flowing. So with logosynthesis, I just sort of like explain it that this is what we're doing with words. This is what we're doing to communicate with both consciously with ourselves as well as unconsciously with ourselves. And so that if you can take that issue and just let it be, and I think some of the most important words I probably use when I'm using logosynthesis is let the words do the work.
Yes.
You know, what it does is it gets that responsibility again away from them, even though they are doing it. It allows them to just, you know, just let the words do the work.
Yes.
And it puts them, you know, this model puts people in lots of different places with all of these therapeutic modalities, as you were pointing out, Shanda, the idea that, you know, it incorporates NLP, I'm trained in that too, and hypnosis and and mindfulness, all of that. This is a mindfulness experience as well. I also explain it that way to them. And it connects to unconscious processes for those of folks who are spiritually inclined. It can also take them to that as well. It's a very freeing model. And as a person who enjoys that level of freedom myself, it's I think it's a wonderful alternative for people to really experience if they'll allow it.
I think it's really important because when you talk about the higher consciousness part, my clients typically don't have a huge interest in knowing how it works, why it works. They just love that it works, that it's gentle on their system. They're not bombarded with all kinds of intrusiveness, as you very poignantly mentioned. They just love that it works for them, and that they don't have these ongoing flashbacks and hypervigilance that just goes on at very intense levels. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think for me, what I kind of couch all of what I do in is a teaching of contemplative practices, I call it now. And so logosynthesis is part of the contemplative practice. And I think that, you know, as I've gotten sort of known in this area for that, it's just another piece of it. And to your point, it is calming, it is peaceful, it is, you know, and it works. And that's all they care about.
Right.
That's all I care about.
True. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Diana Salters from South Africa, if I believe correctly.
Yeah. Hi, Diane.
I wanted to say something about the magic part, because I think that all healing is magic. All healing modalities have their moments of magic that we really can't explain very well, very easily. But I think one of the things that I have particularly appreciated about logosynthesis, having trained in many different modalities and worked for many years in different ones, is the sheer speed with which people can move and shift.
Thank you.
And that the really is about unlocking energy. And you know, that does happen in other modalities. It does happen in Gestalt work, that energy is shifted and unlocked in TA. In sand play, I use symbols and I often see dramatic shifts. But the particular simplicity and speed of logosynthesis is quite extraordinary in my view. And having said that, I still have a question, which is about, I find that with some of my clients, logosynthesis seems to be an instant take. They just take it immediately and run with it, and they shift like that. And with others, that's not quite as much the case. And I wondered whether you have any guidance about the how and the when and the where. It doesn't matter because I use something else perhaps, but I'm just curious to know whether you've noticed similar kind of things in your work.
I certainly can speak to that. Diane, I work with complex PTSD, as I've mentioned, and so it's not single incident. It's many, 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 many layers. And one thing I've learned along the way is that I need to have patience for the healing trajectory of it. So I can remember having supervision with Willem Lammers one time with a client that I have with a very, very severe sexual assault where she actually lost consciousness. And there were pieces of the assault that were haunting her for a very long time, even though we had done sentences after one another. But there were parts that just took time. The other thing that I've noticed is that some clients take a longer time to develop a strong working alliance where they trust someone else to hold that space for them. So it's not always about the clinician. It's not always about the modality. It sometimes is about just taking time to develop trust and having a really beautiful working alliance where the client can be held in a very safe container to delve into some of the very scary parts of what they don't really want to go into. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, the time thing particularly makes sense, because now I think about it, the people who have moved more slowly with logosynthesis are clients with whom I've had to move very slowly anyway, and they move slowly with everything.
Okay.
Now I
Yes.
think about it. That
Okay.
is
Yeah.
actually perhaps speaks to my question to some degree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a brilliant question. I really appreciate you bringing it forward, Diane. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we also have the last intervention from Lucia Ripota.
Hi, Lucia.
Hi,
Hello.
Lucia.
Hi. Yeah, I have more than one question. I am a self-user, so I'm not a therapist. And I also have complex PTSD. And my question refers to addiction. So I have an eating disorder, which has two components. So there is an anorexic part, which always wants to restrict and has a great fear of gaining weight. And then there is the eating part that takes over and is like, I feel like I'm under control of something else. So. And I worked with I just read the book, yes, and I started using it, and I really made progress with the I remember scenes when I went to the grocery store, and on my way to the grocery store I had this immense cravings, and I did the sentences, and it really went away. It was a miracle for me, but it's coming back. So it's very annoying for me that the cycle keeps going, and often I'm just exhausted to go on. And then when I'm exhausted and I don't believe in the process, then of course it doesn't work, or I can't really relax into it. And I tried EFT so many times. EFT never worked, so I was happy that at least did something. And I also worked on the how you call that, the convincement, or that belief that I must be skinny to be happy. So this is the strong I have inside. Right. And that doesn't change at all. I just can't. I don't know. It's like a toxic relationship. There is such a magnetic attraction to being skinny. If you have any idea how I could work?
I have all kinds of ideas. In a short time, I don't know what I can say other than sometimes when we have very deep work to do, like addictions and belief systems that may have been there for a very long time, it's helpful to have someone that can guide you through the work. It's a great tool for self-coaching. I'm really happy to hear that you're having some success with it in using it, but I think sometimes we really need to have a guide, a clinician that can be there, a coach, a clinician that can be there to hold the space for you so that you can be vulnerable to go to these places that may be not all consciously aware. And is there something you'd like to add to that, Alan?
No, I was thinking about the same thing. I've noticed how powerful logosynthesis can be for self-support, and there's only so far where I can get there. And I'm grateful for the support of the community whenever I have needed to process something. I no longer hesitate and contact anyone to work with my own issues, and it's the best decision I've ever made in my personal development. And
Yeah.
it always helps me also to help my own clients when I'm ahead of them, like 30 minutes ahead of them, or like 10 minutes ahead of them. By
2
processing
minutes
my,
ahead.
yeah, by processing my own issues, I'm able to be there with them and support them. So I always go back to the same advice. Find someone, work with someone. It's the best decision you can make, so that you don't
Because
have to be
they're
strong
going
and
to
do it all
listen.
alone.
They're going to listen carefully, Lucia, to your language. And you express very eloquently what's happening for you, but sometimes we don't hear ourselves until we speak out loud. And when someone else, it resonates for someone else, and they can pick up on those little nuances and then use the language in the sentences for you, you may notice that you have much more relief that's longer lasting, or goes even way back to some very early frozen energy structures that are inviting the addictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I get it.
Covering up the pain of what happened early on. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. May I ask one other question? It's a short one.
Oh, we have 1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay. Sometimes I'm so exhausted after the first phrase. I feel that so much is happening, and I'm like, okay, now I need a rest. Is it okay sometimes to use just the first phrase and then maybe go back to the theme the next day for the second phrase?
What I would recommend is have a drink of water after that first sentence.
Yeah.
What's important is to do all 3 sentences, but drink lots of water in between the 3 sentences, because in the first sentence, you're just pulling the fragmented pieces together, and it takes a lot of energy to do that, perhaps.
Yeah.
The second sentence is removing all the non-me energy, the energy that does not belong to me, and sends it
Yeah.
away from the system. And the third sentence is then it helps all the reactions that you have to this issue that you're working on. So the thoughts, the emotions, the body sensations. So it's really important to do all 3 sentences. You can do the first and second sentence, but you'll have to repeat over and over and over again. The third sentence, in conjunction with the first and the second, really does the work.
Okay.
So the first sentence, it's not going to be enough. You really
Yeah.
need to do the second and the third sentence as well, if you want to have longer lasting effects.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're really tired, it's important to hydrate the system with water.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank
It
you.
will help to stabilize the system. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we've had our very first part of this healing trauma track with Shanda. And I'd like us to continue now. Thank you very much, Shanda, for this enlightening conversation. We really appreciate everything you bring to us every time we get together.
Thank you for inviting me, Ellen. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you.